and now you get to see him live. Put it together for the very funny Mr. Brendan McNally!
Hey everybody.
Hello.
How are you today?
Woo!
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I can take this off now. Do we have the protocol? All right. So, this is awesome. This is part of my F2020 autumnal bucket list pandemic tour of nowhere. No offense to everybody sitting there. I also have something online, but we'll talk about that later. So, the thing I noticed about social distancing in February, it wasn't so much that I was an early adopter of social distancing, as it was I was an adopter of anti-social distancing, maybe even the inventor of it. See, because I live in Centretown, which is one of Ottawa's downtown neighborhoods, and every day an extra 30 or 40,000 people would come into the neighborhood to commute to work and to cough on me. So, like, Canada coughs like, and Orleans coughs like, and in the Glebe, they're like, actually, not only do we not cough, we ride our bicycles to work. So there was just tons of people all over the place, and I couldn't keep away from them. So what I did was I got my flagpole, and I would parade around like I was riding a horse, and I would shout, "My name is Indigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to joust." And it worked quite effectively, I thought. Everybody stayed the hell away from me because I was in my own small little white room. Now, the thing about the pandemic is it needs a theme song. And I've got a couple, so you're lucky. This one's to the tune of REM's It's the End of the World as We Know It, and it goes a little bit like this. I'll have to get rock and roll dramatic for you. It's the end, because I can't sing. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel I was misled as to what the state of my emotional well-being would be. It's mostly anxious and bored, but I got laundry done, and 3 days later I put it away instead of throwing it out of my apartment window. So I gave myself a King Lear lockdown award. Now, if you're not familiar with what King Lear lockdown awards are, it's probably because I only recently invented them. But here's how it kind of works. You remember back in the beginning, like Dear Pandemic, happy 7th anniversary, love no one. It's been a while. So back in the beginning, they had all those motivational speakers who were like, "Oh, you can use the time in lockdown to do something productive, like learn a language." And I'm like, well, first off, I already speak a language. And second off, I think surviving a pandemic is something really practical, right? And then they're like, "Oh, but during the bubonic plague, Shakespeare wrote King Lear from lockdown." And I'm like, clearly you know nothing about Shakespeare or King Lear, because that's not a romantic comedy. That's one of his biggest tragedies, right? And what Shakespeare did was what we all did, which is what we do, and that's whatever we do. If you have kids, you take care of kids. If you have old folks, you take care of them. You take care of yourself. He was a writer, so he sat on his couch, and he looked out the window, and what he saw was like, holy shit, okay, poke the eyes out, and this kind of stuff. So, yeah, King Lear lockdown awards kind of work like this. If you got transferred to working remotely, and then you made it to work, boom, King Lear lockdown award. And heck, even if you slept in, technically you were still at work. So boom, King Lear lockdown award. And most importantly, if you still have the same number of kids now than at the beginning, boom, King Lear lockdown award. Unless it's more kids. That's the thing. Now, with the public health measures for travel restrictions and stuff like that, you can't go as far as you could before, and things like that. It was a bit more difficult. So here in Ottawa, we got this thing called light rail transit, the LRT. So what I like to do is hop on the LRT and go to South Keys Station and then ask somebody for directions to North Keys. So I'd like to say thanks to Pierre and Jamim for running this class. It's been awesome. Got to learn a bunch of stuff. Yeah. Stuff like the rule of 3 and callback. So like callback works like, if I was a comedian standing on stage here and I said something like, "That movie was so bad," we learned stuff like that. Yeah, so this global pandemic is so big. the sound of the beep, the date will be March 223rd. Beep! And it's so big that YouTube and Facebook started giving out degrees and diplomas from the University of Doorknob Licking. Which reminds me, I bumped into a friend after the first lockdown. I hadn't seen it in a while, which could have been anybody, and pictures were taken and posted on social media and stuff like that. And somebody wrote and said, "Ha ha, for Halloween are you going out as Karl Marx?" And I was like, Karl Marx? I was trying to be like Harpo or Chico or the guy who smoked a cigar. What was his name again? And this doesn't like awesome. So I was like, okay, Karl Marx. I'm going to do some Karl Marx impersonations. Is that a lump in my proletariat, or I'm just happy to see you? I have no idea where that accent was, but I think maybe Upper Westphalia. And then there's, "Doorknob lickers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your sense of smell, or something else. I'm not exactly sure what at the moment. But the lighter doesn't work, which is maybe kind of apt, because this is my Zippo, my Toronto Maple Leafs Zippo. It hasn't worked since '67, I believe. And the thing I find, the only thing that's worse about being a Leafs fan in Ottawa is being a Leafs fan from Ottawa in Toronto. Because they want to hate you like everybody else does from across the country because you happen to live in Ottawa, but you're a Leafs fan, so they're kind of conflicted and they're like, So what I do is I tell people I'm actually from Centertown. And when they say, "Where's that?" I say it's a small place in Eastern Ontario, not far from North Keys. So I noticed in Ottawa recently, because of the pandemic, we passed a grim milestone. When it was announced that the LRT, the light rail transit, had its first anniversary. And if you remember last year before it opened, they were supposed to do tests before they opened it. And they did all the tests and it opened, and then it was broken. Like, I'm not a rail engineer, but square wheels, right? And those guillotine doors that you didn't know if you could get on or off, or if you could make it to work, so it's kind of like prepped for the pandemic and stuff like that. And then they had the handrails, right, up here, and I'm tall enough, but they didn't have the straps for people that were shorter, so people just hung on to me, and we'd be swinging around bends, and they'd be like, "I'm so sorry," I'm like, "I'm not going to work today either, it's okay, everything's fine." Because we couldn't get out of the doors. And the Transit Commission was like, "Well, it worked perfectly well when there was no passengers on it. So maybe look in the mirror there, eh, Buster?" So when they announced the first anniversary, they also announced that they took the time of the pandemic to fix all the stuff that should have been fixed before they opened. So, once again, LRT works perfectly without passengers. So, if you think local travel is wonky, international travel is even wonkier. Here's an example. A couple weeks ago, I traveled from Centertown in the morning all the way over the ocean to my uncle's funeral in County Tipperary, Ireland, the same morning, right? Turns out it's not such a long, long way to go after all. Now, my uncle was a vet in rural Ireland, and it was awesome growing up as a kid, and even as an adult, I loved going out on calls with him and stuff like that. And we go to places that weren't in any tourist brochures, and places that didn't even appear on the map, like Ballygo fucking nowhere, which isn't far from Ballygo fuck yourself, right? And he taught me a bunch of stuff, some not really useful in downtown city, right? So, for example, he's like, "Sure, today we're going to teach you how to birth a calf," right? Not very handy when you're standing at the bus stop to go to work, Bank in Gladstone in the morning, birthing a calf, no thanks. But then he said, "Sure, now we'll teach you how not to get kicked in the head by a horse," which was really handy until the pandemic and the musical ride was cancelled. But then he's like, "Okay, we'll teach you how to milk a cow with it." And we went down to the shops, and he opened up the milk fridge, and because I was young, his tip to me was to milk one of the cows on the lower shelf, right? Now, that used to be handy, but today, even in Ireland, they have built-in containers, so learning how to milk a cow is a bit useless. But one thing he did teach me, because he was a medical doctor, and I learned that if I had the sniffles or a cold, I knew how much horse tranquilizer to snort. And the reason this came in handy in downtown city was because years later, ketamine came on the scene. And a friend of mine's like, "Hey man, you want some special K?" And I'm like, You don't sound like you have a cold. But the most important thing Montel told me was the truth about what vaccines cause, and this is it. Vaccines cause adults. Now, to finish off, I'd just like to say thanks once again for all of you coming all the way down to Preston Street. Thanks to Absolute. Thanks to Jabin and Pierre once again. And I'll finish with another theme song. And this one's to the tune of Dexy's Midnight Runners, Come On Eileen. 3, 2, 1. And again, I'm not a good singer, so I'm making this up. Come on, Eileen. Oh, yeah. COVID-19, wash your hands on 19. If you're nervous, you have every right to be, like I said in the first song, but you weren't listening, maybe not. It's perfectly okay to be nervous and bored during a global pandemic. And here's the thing, it's so okay to be those things that I'm giving you all King Lear Lockdown Awards. Thanks very much, everybody.
Yeah!